Welcome to the Cypher Podcast, where we discuss all things sci and the paranormal through the lens of remote viewing. I'm Brett Stewart, accompanied by my co-hosts, Emily and David. And in today's show, we're speaking with Vincent Field, an experienced astral projector and lucid dreamer. But before we get into our discussion with him, please head over to cypher.com. That's PSIPHR.com. You can find our entire back catalog of free shows there. Additionally, we continue these discussions for each of our episodes in our premium after hours show, where we often dive a little bit deeper into the paranormal and the strange. So if those interest you, please head over to our website to get access. Our guest today is Vincent Field. Vincent Field is an author of Astral Projection and Lucid Dreaming, Spiritual Revelations and the Out-of-Body Experiences in Higher Dimensions, a complete guide to exploring non-physical reality. He has over 20 years of experience as a practitioner and mentor in astral projection, lucid dreaming, and meditation, facilitating revelations about the higher self, the nature of reality, past lives, and connection with spiritual beings, including aliens. And so with that, Vincent, thank you for joining us on the Cypher Podcast. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think this will be a really fun episode to talk a little bit about lucid dreaming and astral projection. We do something in the same vein. It's a little bit different, but to start off some of these questions, Emily, I know you had some good ones to begin with, so I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. So, Vincent, we've all listened to many interviews you've done on other podcasts. We all have your books, so we're familiar with your work. For the benefit of our listening audience, would you be able to give us a quick bio or background on your professional work with astral projection and lucid dreaming, kind of how you got started, your origin story, and what you've accomplished over the course of your career? What are some of your highlights?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, this all started when I was 14 years old. I was just a curious kid browsing the internet, and I came across a website talking about out-of-body experiences. That was the first time I was introduced to that concept, and it just seemed so incredible to me, and I wanted to do it. And I tried that technique every day for less than a week. I was able to leave my body, and I've been practicing that ever since. So I started my practice with astral projection, but almost immediately I began to lucid dream as well, almost as a byproduct of my astral projection practice. It was like an overall effect on my consciousness where I was gaining lucidity in all these altered states that normally we just are on autopilot for, like the dream state. And so, over the years, I just honed in on my skills and I developed and progressed in my practice. I've made some pretty incredible discoveries about the nature of the self and reality and what's out there beyond this physical world.
You know, something that as a listener, if I didn't do out of body projection myself or had some experiences just with other techniques that are maybe similar to yours, but a little different, something that I'd love to know is that first experience that you had, because I know for myself, it kind of just shook my entire reality once I started having some of these kinds of experiences that are similar. I'm curious about your first experience, like that origin story, that first event. What was that like? Like, how did you react to that?
Yeah, that was incredible because you read about what it's like, but you never truly have an idea until you actually experience it yourself. And it's just like exhilarating and exciting and just like mind blowing. And you have that experience, you realize like this is actually real because until you have the experience, there's always like that doubt in the back of your mind, like maybe this is just BS. And then you discover like this is real and you start to see the potential behind this practice and you see how much more there is to reality than what we experience in our normal daily lives. And so that first experience is just really eye-opening. And it just created this motivation within me that I wanted to go out there more and more and explore more and more. And the past 23 years, that's what I've been doing.
Not everyone is super familiar with all these terms: lucid dreaming, astral projection, out of body projection. And then there's even this idea of phasing or the real time zone, which you've written about in your book. Could you help the listener parse that a little bit? Like, what are the main differences between these? Could you help us understand those from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I started my own podcast called The Astral Dimensions. And the episode I released today is exactly on this topic: the differences between astral projection and lucid dreaming. And there are similarities and there are differences. Your consciousness in another level of reality beyond the physical dimension, right? But there are many differences. Okay, so one difference is how these experiences are typically induced. So typically, astral projection is more of a direct experience where you transition into this state directly from the waking state. So you're awake, you lay in bed, you do meditation, and you leave your body, and there's no break or lapse in your consciousness. Whereas with a lucid dream, typically you fall asleep and then there's some kind of subconscious trigger which sparks your lucidity, and then you gain awareness in a dream, right? And so at that point, you're consciously experiencing another level of reality, but you have that break in consciousness. So it's not a direct experience. There's also the difference of the degree in which your subconscious mind influences the experience. It's typically accepted that it's a creation of the subconscious mind, right? Whatever scenario and environment you're experiencing in a dream are all flowing from these deeper portions of your own consciousness. And so when you become lucid in a dream, you're still experiencing this dimension that is heavily influenced by your subconscious mind. Whereas with an astral projection, you are entering more of an objective level of non physical reality that is not so much tainted by your subconscious.
What's the relationship to this idea of the real time zone that you've discussed in your book? Is there a connection there?
The real time zone, this is a term coined by Robert Bruce. And essentially, what it is a dimension, an astral dimension that is very close to the physical dimension. And so it's essentially like an energetic reflection, like almost like a duplicate of the physical dimension, but in the astral. And as you get further and deeper into non physical reality, and as you penetrate into higher and higher dimensions, these realities become more and more different from the physical world. So maybe you'll project from your body and you'll be above this real time zone or above this base level astral dimension that is essentially a duplicate of the physical dimension. And all of a sudden, your room is totally different. Your neighborhood is different. You're in a different place. And as you get higher, things start to get even farther removed from what we're used to in the physical dimension, more abstract and surreal. And that's when things get really interesting.
Why do you think something like that exists? Have you ever thought about that or postulated about that? Why would you think that occurs that way, that there's this kind of mirror level in the astral to what we actually would see in the physical? A lot of people, I think, misidentify that as the physical. And then they go, wait, it's different. And then they go and they find that, wait, that book isn't there on that shelf.
Reality seems to exist in a spectrum of all these different dimensions, essentially superimposed over one another. So any two dimensional levels in a linear way of thinking can be considered to be like so close to one another that there won't be many differences. But as you get farther in that spectrum, and you can consider each dimension of reality to exist at a particular like vibration or rate of energy, right? A particular frequency. And so frequencies that are very close to another will be very similar. And as those become more and more different, so will the reality that you experience.
So you've shared with us some models that you have built over time through your experience about how reality works. One of the things that jumped out to me in listening to your other podcasts and reading your book is the overlap between the things that it seems like you've discovered and some stuff like what Robert Monroe discovered. You even mentioned, I think, some of these things in your other speaking engagements and writings and so on. How much did that influence your thinking on these issues, and how much of that is your discovery directly about these things? I guess what I'm asking is, did their work help you think about these experiences of reality a certain way, or did you come to them on your own terms and then they just happened to match up with what these other people had discovered as well?
I think a little bit of both. In some aspects, I came into the experience having this knowledge that other people have experienced a certain thing. And so I went out exploring to discover the reality of the situation. Is it actually like that? Is it different? I never went into it expecting it to be like that. But in certain cases, I did have this knowledge that other people had one particular experience. So let's see what the deal is with that, and to either verify it or to see that maybe it's not actually like that. And in other aspects, I came across my own discoveries before having the knowledge that anyone else had a similar experience. And then later it was confirmed by other people sharing similar insights and discoveries. So, yeah, a little bit of both.
So we're all remote viewers, and there's overlap between AP and remote viewing. And I think people very often confuse them. One remote viewing methodology we use is called extended remote viewing, which is about as close to AP as you're doing as you can get. It's done in a light trance of like a mind awake, body asleep state. But I noticed in your book, I think it's chapter 7 or maybe 8, you mention you don't get vibrations going into the higher planes, like the mental plane, maybe. I'm not quite sure exactly where the cutoff is. So do you think there's a distinction between the mental body and the astral body? And how does this phenomenon of vibrations play into it? Because it doesn't happen to us as remote viewers. It happens when we do AP, but we'll sit there and our body's completely motionless. We don't feel any of those sensations as we go into that state. So like, what's the difference? Where's the boundary between those, do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to speak of boundaries because it seems like one level kind of flows into another in more of like a fluid way where there's not exactly like one cutoff point. But I noticed that with the mental projections that I didn't experience these vibrations. And in a general sense, over time, as I developed and as I started to access higher and higher dimensions, these vibrations reduced and eventually pretty much stopped. And what makes sense to me is that the result of projecting into a lower dimensional astral body, right? So essentially, the astral body that you experience, or whatever non physical body you inhabit during these experiences, will be of the same frequency, the same energy as the dimension that you project into, right? And so the lower dimensions, they're a bit denser, a little heavier, and you feel this energy more strongly, right? And so as you start to access these higher dimensions that are existing in a more finely tuned frequency, these energetic vibrations become like imperceptible. I think that's how it is with the mental projection. It's a finer type of energy body. And, a lot of times during my mental projections, I don't even perceive having a body at all. I'm just pure consciousness, a point of consciousness, essentially. You mentioned that you do experience vibrations during your astral projections and not so much during your mental or remote viewings. I don't have a lot of experience with remote viewing. My idea of that is more that it's a type of mental projection where you explore the physical dimension more so than these higher astral dimensions. I've read a lot of books back in the day about government programs regarding that, and they would use this practice to retrieve information about the physical world, right? But it is interesting that you have the same type of experience that I have regarding these vibrations and the energy.
So you might be familiar with this term hitchhiker effect, where for whatever reason, people have some sort of encounter with a paranormal situation, and then it's almost like some entities attach to them and follow them back that affects them in their physical waking reality of their everyday experience. In your experience with astral travel or even with lucid dreaming, have you ever had anything sort of follow you back, like come back from those realms and affect your physical life in any way?
I've had experiences with a particular group of entities that appear to be alien in appearance and in nature. And I do have memories of them, like physical memories, like after awakening from a projection in which I interacted with them. I would have these memories of them being in my room in physical reality. And see, it's a lot of times when you hear about alien abductions and encounters, it seems like a lot of times it's not easy for the person to fully recollect certain things. Maybe there's some type of mental blockages going on. I have similar experiences to that where it seems like I'm missing time. I have flashes of memories, but what actually happened is like somewhere beneath the surface and like I can't access it. I experienced this one group of entities for many years. I even have had encounters, sightings of UFOs, and I can't say if I saw these UFOs as a result of these encounters during my astral projections, but it's certainly possible.
In your book, you mentioned the mantid or insect like creatures. And you described also, I think, in that part of your book, like a blurry memory, but that they were a part of that. The reason why I'm bringing this up is that I also, in my remote viewing, have encountered similar things to this, not necessarily lost memory with it, but that they've showed up in relationship to different topics, or even it seems there's an interest in those who are using consciousness skills or consciousness tools. Like, what's your big take on that? Because the whole mantid thing is a rather large topic. Where do you land?
Sure. I've had encounters with many different groups or types of these entities, right? And so, in the cases where I seem to have some kind of like missing memories, but I do get the sense that this is something that was like imposed rather than something of my own doing. With some of these groups, they do appear a bit sinister in nature, right? So, when I'm out in these higher dimensions, you kind of get a direct sense of energy, and you can verify this even before having the visual experience and encounter. You will experience the energy first, and then the encounter will ensue. Sometimes the other way around. But this one group, they definitely had a sinister energy, and they would actually take me out of my body against my will. And I've had experiences where I actually experienced pain as a result of them affecting me out of my body. I've also had encounters with other groups who were on the completely different side of the spectrum, where they were enlightened, and they showed me these incredible things and allowed me to have these amazing experiences, bliss and love. And so I think there are so many different groups out there, and they don't all have the same agenda.
We've talked a lot about self-protection in previous episodes. I'm curious if you've have any thoughts for those who are having these experiences, because we know that there's a large spectrum of energy, positive, negative out there. What do you personally do to make sure your space is clear, that you're in a good place? You obviously have people around you you want to protect, I'm sure. Is there anything that you do specifically for self-protection?
Well, I don't have any particular rituals, but what I discovered is that intention plays a big role. And what I learned after many encounters of a negative nature is that, well, it's very easy to respond in fear. And so a lot of times I would have a negative experience, and a fear response would trigger within me, and I would just go right back into my body. I would abort mission and the experience, right? But I discovered that if I can control that fear and not allow it to overcome me, I can focus within and generate a positive energy, generate love. And when I do that, it elevates me to a level that is beyond the influence of these negative entities. And at first, I thought that they were being repelled by this energy. But over time, with experience and experimentation, I started to realize that actually I was elevating myself to a higher level where they didn't have access to.
So I'm interested in this idea of unquestionable knowing. I know you had a couple of experiences where you just got like a knowing that you know is true somehow. Because I've had this experience in my waking life. And one time it saved me from a car wreck. And another time it was just like, look up there, there's a shooting star, which was cool. So those are my only two experiences of totally unquestioning knowing where I didn't think, can I rely on this? I just did, which both times that was a benevolent, useful thing, but it kind of short circuits our free will in a way to have that come in there. And it's like I was going to stop the car. There was no thought process about it, and saved me from a huge wreck, right? So it was a good thing. But what is going on there? Can we always trust these perceptions? Like if we have an unquestionable knowing in that way, is it always going to be with our best interests at heart?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question and idea. My experiences of this nature are mainly during my projections, although I have noticed that they do carry over into my life at times, and I will have these intuitions or these hunches that turn out to be true. And I don't take them as unquestionable knowing, although because I always leave open the possibility that I could be wrong, right? And a lot of the times it's right. It turns out to be exactly how this deep feeling plays out. So as I started to access these higher dimensions, I started to be able to tap into a higher level of consciousness. And it's not like a separate consciousness, but it was like it's a higher aspect of my consciousness. And it's something that I call the higher self, right? Commonly, it's called the higher self. Some people call it like collective consciousness. But essentially, as you get into these higher dimensions, this connection opens up more and more between these higher portions of ourselves, which we are commonly unaware of. And it's from these higher aspects of our consciousness in which truth and insight and knowledge, it just flows from that. And it's particularly in these higher dimensions where I experience this unquestionable knowing of truth. And in the highest dimensions, there's a like a unification like with God, with all that is, with the creator. And it's hard to accurately describe or to get people to understand when they don't have these experiences. We always need some kind of like proof, some evidence to back up our ideas and what we believe is true or false. But in these higher dimensions, you become one with the source of truth. And just saying that to some people, maybe it doesn't make sense, but that's the way it is.
Have you had experiences where you communicated with other parts of yourself, whether non-physical, or even what I've discovered is I've had interactions with what seem to be different versions of myself in different parts of time, or even in a time that doesn't make sense. Have you had anything like that where there's other versions of yourself maybe you've run into?
Yeah, absolutely. And I started having these experiences when I started connecting with my higher self. And what I realized is that you can access these other individuals' experiences and even experience yourself as them, right? And a lot of people subscribe to this cyclical notion of reincarnation where your body dies and then you're born into a new body. And so now, like, you develop a new personality in that life, and then it's just a cycle. And what I discovered is that it's not this cyclical reincarnation cycle, but it's actually more of a simultaneous type of phenomenon where our higher self is having all these experiences at different points of time, like you said, different levels of reality, and not even just humans but non-humans. I've had experiences where I realized that I was shown that I have a life as like an alien entity in another system of reality. And of course it sounds crazy, but I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, you can connect with these other aspects of yourself when you begin to tap into higher states of consciousness in these higher dimensions. And yes, some of them are, a lot of them are on Earth here with us, maybe not at the same time, in the past, in the future. A lot of times it's hard to like compartmentalize all of it because sometimes just like a download of all this information all at once. And sometimes it's just hard for the mind to just separate everything, and it can be very overwhelming. I learned how to kind of hone in on particular individuals and to experience their lives. And when you do, you're experiencing it as your own life, but it's not like a reincarnation type thing where you yourself are experiencing that. But at this higher level of the higher self, we are all one, right? It is all us. That is who you are. But as we trickle down into these lower dimensions, and I consider the physical dimension to be like the base level of this reality. So as we come down here and experience our consciousness at this ground level, that's when we experience this separation, right? But as we get higher, that disintegrates, and you start to realize how interconnected we all are.
Have you ever had any conversation, or what from your perspective would be discussion with other parts of yourself that are having these other experiences?
Definitely. The downloads happen particularly in the higher dimensions where I essentially merge with my higher self. I experience myself as my higher self. And from that perspective, it's hard for our lower level minds to truly grasp that because it's such a higher way of existing. But so in those situations, it's more of a download where it can be overwhelming. I also have experiences that are more like what you said, that experience where I was watching another aspect of myself who was this dwarf, this individual. He was a dwarf and he was engaged in some kind of war, some kind of battle. And I experienced myself as him. And when you do that in the experience, there's no doubt that is you on some level. And it's hard to explain, right? It's hard to convince people of that, but the experience speaks for itself, right? And sure, so there have been a lot of these types of experiences which happen in lower dimensional levels than the level of the higher self. And in those levels, it's more of a one-on-one, more of a interactional type experience.
I want to shift gears in the conversation here a little bit and get into a topic that I think we touched on a little bit earlier, and that is with respect to the grays or the alien beings. I've spent a lot of time studying the abduction phenomenon. I have some postulates and theories of my own as to what's going on. Part of it might not even be physical, but I really wanted to get your take on what you think the abduction phenomenon is. I'm sure you're aware of it, and how does that relate to your own personal experiences with gray alien type beings?
Yeah. Well, growing up, I always had the idea that alien abductions were a purely physical phenomenon. They're riding around in their UFOs and they come and beam us up in the middle of the night, do some experiments, and then bring us back, right? But as I started to explore these other dimensions of reality, well, I started to encounter them in these astral dimensions. And that was something that I did not expect at all. I had no notion that they were anything but just these physical entities from maybe some other planet or galaxy. And there they were, waiting for me as I left my body. They stalked me essentially for quite some time. They would pull me out of my body. And what I started to realize, because I did a lot of research into the abduction phenomenon, even before starting my astral projection practice, I started to see a lot of similarities between these abductions and the astral projection process, right? It's common to hear reports of people being paralyzed in their bed, right? And then they see some entities and then they're lifted out of their bed and maybe they fly through the wall or through the ceiling into some spaceship, right? And a lot of those elements are exactly what happens during astral projection. Typically, an astral projection is triggered during the mind awake, body asleep state. When your mind is awake and you witness your body fall asleep, you essentially enter a state of paralysis. And when that happens, your consciousness naturally shifts into the astral dimension, even before you lift out of your body, so to speak. And a lot of times, what happens, even during sleep paralysis, which is essentially the same state, your body is asleep, but your mind is awake. Well, you're not actually perceiving the physical world. You're not looking at your physical room. You're perceiving into the astral dimension where all of these other types of entities exist, right? And so a lot of times people will see a shadow being, they'll see aliens, not realizing that they're actually perceiving into the astral dimension. They're actually shifted into the astral already. They just don't realize it because your experience of yourself and your state of consciousness is pretty much the same when you're awake or when you're shifted into these lower dimensional levels of the astral. I believe a lot of people are having these astral level experiences and confusing them for physical experiences. But I also do think that there is some validity to physical abductions, things that can't be explained through astral projection. So I think both is taking place.
Yeah, that makes sense. That fits with all of the things that have uncovered about this phenomenon in my research. I think there's both going on, and a lot of people default to either one or the other. And it's like, well, why can't it be both? It can be both things. It can be physical and non-physical. But I think a lot of experiences that are attributed to physical are, as you described, non-physical, and people just aren't aware of what's going on with them.
I think the times are changing there, in that the UFO people who are just into UFOs seem to be getting more into the idea of consciousness being something you have to understand if you want to understand this phenomena. I'm not sure what's done it, but in the past they've been very dismissive of remote viewing, and there's been this subset of people who want to say it's a nuts and bolts phenomenon, it's only physical. And I think more and more people are coming around to the idea that there's way more going on there. So I wanted to ask you about affecting physical reality from the astral plane, because in the mystical, esoteric, magical traditions, that's the whole theory, right? Is that you go up to the astral or mental planes and you introduce a change there, which then like trickles down. And I've had this idea, which is just a total shower thought in my head for years, about some of the UFOs that people see that are just orbs of light. Are they actually astral projectors accidentally having this effect in physical reality? They behave as non-physical phenomena, right? So have you ever affected physical reality deliberately or accidentally? And what do you think of my pet theory about UFOs?
Interesting. It's interesting. My experience and understanding of astral projection is that you are projecting into other dimensions of reality. So it's not a physical dimension experience. So a direct interaction with the physical world is highly unlikely from that level of understanding. Although I did mention that there are some dimensions, like dimensions that are so close to the physical dimension that they're essentially like a replica, like an energetic reflection. And so I think that it is possible in these lower dimensions that are very close to the physical that you could have some kind of effect in the physical world from that dimensional level. Now, the thing is, as you get higher and higher into these higher dimensions, well, you get farther from the physical dimension. So I think as you get farther, the idea of interacting with the physical dimension just becomes less logical. But some people have experiences where they see shadow beings, right, in the physical world. Now, shadow beings I've seen so many times out of my body, and particularly in the lower dimensions that are closest to the physical world. So that does make sense to me. Maybe sometimes there can be some kind of bleed over. There's an interlapping of the physical and this astral dimension that is so close to it. So about UFOs being astral projectors, I don't know about that, but do you think there are more to certain types of UFOs than just like some kind of spacecraft? I think some of them can actually be a type of conscious entity rather than a spaceship with little dudes riding around inside. Yeah, definitely an interesting theory, though. I like it.
I think we're getting a little bit towards the end of our main show. I do have one final topic I wanted to discuss with you, though, Vince. In your book, you wrote about having experience with ETs, about a computer program that was showing individuals' lives. And it was showing, I'm not sure if corruption was the right word. I don't remember what you used, but it showed where things were getting kind of turned upside down for the individual and the how and the why. And it got me thinking, when I was reading that, if you had experienced or investigated yourself through your own projection, the big picture of what's going on here for humans, because there's a lot. Obviously, there's probably so many different things going on to say, well, it's just one thing is probably not accurate to say. But the meta story, the bigger picture of why, what's going on here, who's involved, what game is really being played. I'm curious what your perspective on that meta story is about human life on Earth and why it's going on in the way that it is right now.
So my insights about that occur mainly in these higher states of consciousness where I'm connected with like universal consciousness. I'm connected with my higher self and I'm gaining access to like these higher level insights that just seem to flow from like the source of truth. And so like I'm not actually like spying on like the powers that be and listening to what they have to say, but I'm gaining these insights from these higher levels. And what I've understood from these experiences is that we are here, like humanity, to essentially evolve, like in a spiritual way. This kind of ties in with the higher self and the purpose of the higher self. Like, why is it kind of probing into all these different individuals and times and dimensions to accumulate all this experience? Because it seems like that's the nature of who we are, to explore and to want to learn and grow and evolve. And that's what I think it's all about. And the idea of being here in a physical body, we're very limited in our understanding of the bigger picture by default, like by design. And the idea is like, it's like that. So we're fully immersed in this experience and we can kind of get the most from it. Like if we're walking around our normal daily lives with like this enlightened perspective of what it's all about and how it's going to play out and who we truly are in these higher dimensional levels as like these grand spiritual beings, it kind of takes away from this experience. And so I think that's by design. And yeah, the idea is to, overcome these struggles that we're faced with here. And through each one, we grow and we learn more. And eventually we take that back with us into our higher states of consciousness. I think it's essentially not a cycle, but I that's the nature of who we are in our reality. We're going to continue to grow and evolve to greater and greater and greater states of enlightenment.
Well, what's next for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I started a podcast. The idea there is that I have 23 years of experience and there's no way I could fit all of those into books, right? I don't have the time to write all those books. And so I think this platform, the podcast platform, is a perfect way for me to share like the full scope of my experiences and my discoveries. And it's a lot easier too, just talking to the microphone. And so I'm working on my next book as well, because I do enjoy the writing process, and publishing is very cool. It's very fun. I get to talk to a lot of people on podcasts and make new friends and stuff like that. And I also think there's a real like educational value, like teaching these techniques and helping people kind of open their mind and exploring these possibilities. So besides that, I'm just continuing my practice, and I have real world jobs as well. I'm not just like an astral projector full time. Life's just a journey, and I'm just going with the flow. And so far it's working out pretty well, and just enjoying it. The podcast is called The Astral Dimensions, and it's on all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can find my book on Amazon.com, and you can reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. My username is Vincent Field Author, just one word. I'm happy to, answer any questions, or I do work with people one-on-one as like a mentor. They have issues with their own practice, and I help them navigate through those and give them advice and techniques. So I'm always open to help.
Well, I think this wraps up our discussion today. Thank you so much, Vincent, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights on lucid dreaming, astral projection, and everything you've kind of uncovered in your 20 plus years of experience. So thank you so much for that. We're going to continue this discussion, Emily, David, and I, in our After Hours episode. And you can find that by heading over to our website, cypher.com, to become a subscriber. But if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. I think it was a great one with Vince. Thank you so much. But until next time, we'll see you on the next Cypher podcast. Take care, everybody.